Hello and welcome to the Crystal Project Solo Character Hard Mode Chaos Mode Challenge run. Now, if you don't know the game, don't worry, I'll explain the important bits and pieces as we go along. When I started this challenge, I had no idea if it would be possible at all, and well, as of recording this, I actually still don't know. To start this challenge, I used the built-in challenge options to set the game mode to Chaos. It says victory is impossible, but how far can you get? Well, that's exactly what I'm trying to find out here. I set the party member limit to 1 and, just as a little bit of quality of life for myself for this run, I decided to enable some options that give me an item that marks all the chests on the map, and to have all the maps already acquired, so it's a bit easier to navigate. At the beginning you can choose between 6 job classes to start with. This choice is largely irrelevant, as you can change job freely at any save point, but in short, the warrior is your typical tanky physical job, monk is a different tanky physical job, rogue is the speedy one with some trickery, cleric can heal and support, wizard deals direct fire and lightning damage, warlock is a hybrid job that can support, deal magic damage, has access to some decent heavy and light equipment, and it's basically your jack of all trades and actually very decent at everything, with some unique traits anyways. Each job has very specific tools that will be helpful one way or another, but I'll get to those as they become relevant. Crystal Project is an open-ish world exploration turn-based RPG with actually really nice platforming. Don't let the blocky aesthetics fool you though, you can't move any blocks around like in Minecraft. However, what it does is, you can tell exactly by just looking at your surroundings if you can make a jump or not. You can jump 2 blocks high and 3 blocks across, so that's neat. The world is fairly large, but here is where we start, in the spawning meadows. This is your tutorial, but already has quite a few little secrets and jumps to explore. This lady here tells you, flames are nothing to be afraid of. Gather your courage and approach. So I do, and... yeah, it's kind of what I expected. This is the weakest enemy in the game. It is faster than us, even if we choose the fastest starting class, which would be a female rogue, and, well, it just one-shots us. Welcome to Chaos Mode. So, how do we do anything? Well, we don't have to fight this thing. In fact, you can avoid most enemies and even bosses if you know your way around. Most enemies are slightly faster than walking speed, but running in circles until they get bored is often a viable strategy. This is the initial area you normally have access to, the spawning meadows, and once you climb your way out of it, you arrive in the Lend. Here we find this fishery, where I purchase a salmon, a fresh one, and a rotten salmon from this shady guy over here. Well, he runs away. But that's about all we can afford. We are lacking money at this point. But, well, let me put it this way, these fish will be worth the investment. A bit further ahead, we find a cave. In here we find our first boss, a giant caterpillar, which, considering we can't even beat the weakest slimes, sends us back to our last save point. In my first casual playthrough of this game, I noticed that you could just simply jump over this boss here and get to the job crystal behind it, so we do that. After picking up this crystal, we now have access to the Fencer job class. This is another physical damage oriented class and adds a few more tools to our big bag of tricks. After exiting the cave, we can visit the seaside cliffs just south of here. After a bit of jumping around and getting murdered by the various inhabitants, I reached the draft shaft conduit. Most enemies in this game disappear when you make them drop into water, so this is another way of getting past them. If you drop into the water or other hazards yourself, the game simply puts you back onto the last solid block you were standing on with no penalty. The torch found in this chest is going to be immensely helpful throughout the run. A bit further into this area we find another boss. A big squid that of course one-shots us. And unlike the previous boss, this one is much faster in movement. You can't jump over it or make it run in circles. However, in my previous challenge run I learned that I could make it start chasing me and just barely get it to drop into the water there. This now gave us access to the Shaman Crystal, a different kind of spellcaster than the wizard, with an innate passive to heal for 25% of the magic damage dealt. The last of the early game areas is back over to the west, Mount Yamagawa, a fairly steep climb all the way up the mountain. I do want to emphasize that there are many enemies along the way that will just eliminate me if I ever get into battle with them. So I hop, skip around them, lure them over the edge, and just generally have to be smart about not getting anywhere close to them. But while I could avoid regular enemies, the boss up top is a different beast entirely. The movement speed of this boss flame is way higher than any regular enemy, and well, I don't need to mention that there's no way to defeat this big lightning spider anytime soon, right? And when I first got here, I did not know a way around this thing, which is a problem, because this thing is guarding our third job crystal to unlock the Scholar class. The standard progression in a regular playthrough would be to get all 3 crystals in the early game areas here, and then enter the Proving Grounds dungeon. However, having only 2 crystals, this was not an option yet. The guard will not let you prove yourself until you have found at least 3 crystals. Besides, the normally weak guy guarding the entrance is massively overpowered, like most enemies in Chaos mode. So our only choice is to sequence break. Now mind you, this is an intentional sequence of jumps into the later game area. I will be avoiding the unintentional ones unless I have no other choice in order to progress. Welcome to the desert. The desert doesn't have much useful stuff, however I need to make sure to stick to the right hand side here in order to reach this boy a bit further ahead. Once you talk to him, he runs back home, and then I could make my way through the dangerous areas, across the desert, sneak past all the enemies and reach the Zarazara Bazaar. Talking to the boy earlier makes this lady here give me a ferry pass. This will allow us to travel further beyond. However, before that, there's this fish merchant here that claims to have the best fish around. But as we show him the fresh salmon we got from the land, he gets jealous and wants us to find some questionable goods from that fishery as well. So that's why we bought the rotten salmon earlier. He is pleased and as a reward gives us the fish skewer weapon. This is a rapier type weapon and it will be extraordinarily helpful. I'll explain later. Afterwards, I used the ferry pass to get a free ride all the way across the ocean. It's a long ride. A very long ride. And at the end, when you arrive in the port, make sure you don't jump off too early, because otherwise you land all the way back in the desert, because that's the last solid block you are standing on. I do this way too often. After not missing the jump, we arrive at the Shodu province. A lot of this area is inaccessible without some movement tools we get later. But we get one of the most important equipment pieces for the entire run in the attic of this area. The Plague Mask. Armor in Crystal Project is divided into 3 categories: light, medium and heavy, and each job can equip only certain types of equipment pieces. The Plague Mask is a light armor hat that allows us to inflict 3 turns of poison to an enemy when we hit them with a physical attack. So this mask would be great to use on a rogue in order to apply additional poison, but because it is light armor and the rogues can only equip medium armor, well, it doesn't quite work that way. Now we have the Torch, which is a wand type weapon that inflicts 3 turns of burn, the Fist Skewer that inflicts 6 turns of bleed, and the Plague Mask that inflicts 3 turns of poison. All 3 of these damage over time status effects effectively do the same thing. They inflict 15% of an enemy's maximum health in damage each take. So if we can apply all 3 of them at the same time, That would be 45% of their health gone in one round. Well, in theory, practically, almost every enemy in the game has a certain amount of resistance to these damage over time effects. But despite that, it will still be our best damage source for a long time against many enemies. From the Shoto province, I head further west and find the Mars Stone in one of those chests. This item allows you to teleport into the middle of the desert, so we can now have a quick way to get back there whenever we need to. This item is the usual way to visit the desert in a casual playthrough, although, yeah, well, you would approach this area normally from the other side and kind of going backwards here. Heading even further west from here, after some tricky jumps, we can climb the mountain and arrive at Okimoto NS. I have no idea what the NS stands for, but well, that's what its name is. Climbing to the top, we find the Ninja Yashiki, and unfortunately, I can't really do anything here. To my knowledge, there is no way to avoid either of the ninja guards on the sides here. They just instantly kill me, basically. If I could just get past one of these guys, I would be able to access the ninja crystal up top and skip everything else and even get access to a lot more stuff afterwards. But as it stands, this is a dead end for now as well. Jumping down the mountain on the west, I eventually reach the capital of Sequoia. This is normally the main hub of the game, and has a variety of useful things I end up picking up here. Most notably, a Gaia Stone, which will allow me to teleport to Sequoia in the future. Besides that, there are 3 more drop crystals that you can pick up around here. The first one is right outside the main gate of the city. This is where you would normally come from after going through the trial dungeon from the beginning of the game. But since we're up here already, we can simply drop down and enter through the exit. The crystal we're looking for is at the entrance of this dungeon, so we'll have to go all the way through here backwards. There's also a boss in the way, which of course would just destroy me if I tried to get into battle with it, but with a little bit of finagling, we can coerce him to drink from the tomato juice nearby, and get past. A short while later, and our next acquisition is the Aegis job. This is a fairly defensive tank support character, and will be extremely vital to get anything done in the Solo Character Challenge. So next up, what would a good RPG be without a sewer section? Well, that's what I thought. Using the teleport from the Gaia Stone to conveniently get on top of the outside wall here on the left, we can jump into the sewer entrance on the side over here, and make our way down. Dropping into this hole leads us to the capital jail. The short version of this section is, we get the south wing key to get the east and west wing keys, and then get some jail cell keys to get the dark wing key all the way on the west side. Also, by the way, don't worry about all these chests I'm skipping in this footage. I picked up almost all of them when I originally started this challenge run. All of the footage you're seeing is me recreating this run using all the save files. And I'm just replaying various parts to be able to show you all the interesting bits and pieces. At the end of this dark wing, we encounter this cloaked, scythe-wielding fellow. I feel like this kind of thing has a name, but you'll get it. After a successful persuasion roll, I convince him that the tomato sauce is worth checking out as well, and we get to the Reaper Crystal. The Reaper is a unique kind of heavy armor physical attacker that uses its health as a resource. However, until we get a lot more equipment, this job will have limited usefulness. The third job that I could pick up in this area was the Hunter, and in order to get to there, I needed to enter the sewers from a different side and enter the Quintar Nest. Avoiding a few more enemies and a bit of platforming later, I acquire also the Hunter Crystal. The Hunter is another flavor of physical attacker, although to be honest, I haven't found much use for it so far. And with this, I didn't really have a clear way to progress anymore in the game. The normal path to proceed here is to rent a Quintar. These are the friendly dinosaur mounts that allow you to move around faster, and most importantly, they allow you to jump gaps that are 4 blocks wide, allowing access to more areas, although they do have the downside that you can only jump 1 block high instead of 2. Renting a Quintar can be done in 2 different ways. For one, the normal avenue of progression would be you defeat the gang squad to the east of the big city and find the Quintar Enthusiast. Well, that's not going to happen anytime soon. The other, usually impossible way, unless you know of the hidden sequence breaks, is to acquire 7 separate job crystals to be allowed to rent a Quintar. I currently had 5, so I would somehow need to get 2 more. Defeating the PvP clown seems a bit far out of reach, because even if you are at a higher level with more equipment, they can still absolutely demolish your party with ease. So, well, let's revisit the crystals for now. Also, I have no idea how to slot this in, but somewhere along the way I did this little jump in the land and got up to the Mercury Shrine. This will allow me to buy a teleport stone to easily get back to the spawning meadows and the land in the future. The first crystal I wanted to get back to was the one on top of Mount Yamagawa. While exploring, I already had an idea on how to possibly get past the boss. Since enemies attempt to chase you for only a certain amount of time and then reset back to their original position, I could maybe lure it out and then just sneak by as it is going back, and well, it worked. I did not know that this boss was skippable until, well, I figured it out exactly during this run, and I was pretty happy to find that. This grants us access to the Scholar Crystal, which, if you know Final Fantasy, is effectively a blue mage. If you see an enemy use abilities with these rainbow symbols, we can learn those abilities and then cast them as spells ourselves, potentially very powerful, as this gives us access to buffs, debuffs and shenanigans no other job can provide otherwise. So now I had 6 crystals. But I was stuck. None of the other crystals in the world are accessible without battling at least some powerful enemy, or getting more movement tools to traverse the overworld. And at this point, I had gathered all of the equipment, weapons and crystals from the areas I had access to, which, well, are a lot of neat little tools and tricks, but nothing stands out to be game-breaking enough to combat the insane power levels of almost any enemy. To illustrate here, there's a number of potential avenues for progression. In the Quintar fields, we need 7 crystals to get a Quintar pass to progress into the next area via a rental Quintar. Or we need to defeat the gang squad to get to the Quintar enthusiast so I could get a Quintar pass from him instead of having to get 7 crystals. Other than that, west of the capital Sequoia is another area, but this one requires not just a rental Quintar, but our own Quintar we could call at any time to progress, since there's a 4-tile gap that we cannot jump over otherwise. Which, getting your own Quintar is also locked behind getting the Quintar pass first. In the desert there is a pyramid which would contain another job crystal. However, in order to access the pyramid, we would need to get 3 watchtower tokens. While we can get 2 of these tokens, the third one requires a Quintar to jump a 4-tile gap. So once again, we need one of those friendly little dinosaurs. Over at the Shodo province, we need a way to jump either higher or swim in the water to access more of the area, which could result in some powerful equipment pieces, or even a crystal. But neither the higher jump or swimming ability are anywhere close to accessible. And lastly, over at Okimoto, we need to get by at least one of these ninjas. This would give us access to 1 more job crystal. And that's it. The only 2 possible routes currently are either defeating one of the ninjas to get a 7th job crystal, or defeating the gang squad to get to the Quintar enthusiast. All other paths require something I didn't have access to yet. I tried for a while to sneak past the ninja still, but to no avail. But maybe I could defeat one of them, but first I would need to somehow acquire some levels. In order to gain some stats, as well as making the various jobs actually useful, since by default in Crystal Project each job comes with 1 ability, and then you have to acquire learn points, or LP for short, in order to unlock more. And this is where I finally get back to these early slime enemies. If you remember, they are still faster than any job we have, and none of the equipment allows us to survive any hits. However, as I was testing if I could somehow outspeed them with faster classes, I noticed they occasionally use an attack called Marrow Slurp. Instead of dealing damage to my HP, it damages my magic points, and leaves me alive and able to act for 1 turn. Now, my first instinct here was to use the various damage over time effects I had access to, since usually that's a good strategy against early game enemies. However, slimes only have 15 HP even on Chaos mode, and combined with a little bit of damage over time resistance, the dots dealt 0 damage, so that was not exactly helpful. My direct attack was also only dealing 4 damage, so that was quite a bit of missing towards the 15 HP as well. The other usual go-to strategy for the early game was to simply use magic, but because these slime bags attacked my MP, this was not an option since I didn't have any MP to cast spells with. After a bunch of tinkering, I stumbled across a solution. You see, I felt like my only option was to somehow deal enough damage with a single physical attack to defeat the slime, so I grabbed the strongest attack things I could find. The knockout stick I found in the Sarazara Bazaar, one bracer accessory I found somewhere along the way that gives +8 strength, and the torpid cuffs that were in the chest somewhere on Mount Yamagawa. These cuffs give a massive amount of attack power as long as you're lower level. This allowed me to theoretically hit 20 damage. Well, 12% of the time. So I needed to get lucky to get Marrow Slurp as the first attack, which seems to be a 1 in 3 chance, and then land the 12% chance to hit. Well, it was not a great solution, but it was better than nothing to get started. After many attempts where I ran into the slime, got knocked out and ran back, it finally happened. 1 kill, 180 experience, only 70 to go for my first level. Leveling up would give me some more stats to work with and maybe enough learning points to unlock more abilities to make this even easier. Now, the footage you see is where I went back to actually record this. It took me about half an hour to get the clip for the hit with the knockout stick, which is also why my LP is maxed out on this character already. But while writing this script, I noticed another thing. There is a dagger you can buy in the capital city, the Rondel dagger. This weapon is not as strong as the knockout stick, but just about strong enough to get 17 damage, and that is sufficient for 15 HP. But the special thing about this dagger is that it has a -25 TT modifier. TT stands for turn timer. In short, it gives you 25 units of speed at the beginning of combat for free, which is just enough to get an attack in before the slime hits. So if, for whatever reason, you decide to embark on this mission to conquer this kind of challenge yourself, please use the Rondel dagger. It probably would have saved me a few hours over here. Now, I hope you understand why I'm not going to redo this part just to get a little bit of footage for the video. But eventually, I gained enough levels to be able to naturally outspeed the slimes, as well as no longer needing both braces to one-shot them, which meant I could instead equip the scope specs, an accessory I picked up in a chest while walking through the desert. This would dramatically increase my accuracy and speed up the grind. I did this for a while. Well, I genuinely have no idea how long it took, but here's a few key abilities I wanted to unlock from the various classes along the way. From the monk, I could the passive ability Counter. This allowed my character to retaliate with a physical attack whenever he gets hit by a physical attack of an enemy, effectively allowing me to deal damage while fully focusing on staying alive. From the rogue skill tree, I would get the Pocket Sand passive, which would blind my opponent if they knocked me into critical HP. Blind means that they guaranteed miss if they use a physical attack on the next turn. Further, the rogue also has an active ability, Sleep Bomb. When used on an enemy, this puts them to sleep for 2 turns. Any direct damage will wake them up, but otherwise they will not be able to act. And yes, that is as crazy powerful as it sounds. However, the caveat is that any creature can only be put to sleep once per combat. That includes the player. From the wizard, I would get the Equip Wand passive, so I could equip the torch on jobs that could not normally equip it whenever that's relevant. From the Warlock I would get the Regenerator passive, which gives me a buff for 6 turns at the beginning of combat, where I would get healed for 15% of my maximum HP every single turn, as well as the Blaze spell, which would deal a little bit of direct fire damage and inflict the burn debuff for 3 turns as well, which also is not subject to chance to hit, so it is a lot nicer to inflict burn debuff that way. From the Fencer I would get the Eagle Eye passive. This gives me a buff that lasts for 1 attack at the start of combat, where I guaranteed hit an enemy. That is really nice if your chance to hit is only 12% by default, as you might be able to imagine. I also got the Equip Rapier passive, so I could use the Fish Skewer on other characters as well. Last but certainly not least, from the Aegis class I would get the Equip Shield passive, which allowed any job to use a shield. Although we don't have any useful shields right now, this will be helpful in the future, as well as the Stalwart passive. Now let me tell you, unlocking Stalwart was absolutely massive. As long as I was at full HP, I would guaranteed survive any one attack with 1 HP remaining. It's basically the sturdy ability if you know Pokemon, so this would finally allow me to survive an attack of an enemy. This would also finally give me the freedom to defeat more than just slimes. Oh, also, real quick, the way passive abilities work in Crystal Project is as follows. You have a total of 10 passive points available. Each passive ability has its own point cost, so you can't equip all of these passives at once, and you have to pick and choose which ones you need at the time. Despite the enemies in Chaos Mode being mercilessly strong, the higher level you are compared to the enemies, the less experience they give. This is indicated by the color of the enemy flame. Blue means that they are about the same level as you. Green means they are at a lower level than you and grant reduced experience. Grey means they no longer give you any experience at all because they are significantly below your level. Worth noting, however, you still get your LP from the encounter, so at least something. Orange means that they are at a higher level, and red means that they are at a way higher level than you are. So because the enemy flames eventually would turn grey and no longer give experience because I was going to level up, there was always that nagging feeling in the back of my mind that I may run out of options to level up eventually. Thankfully, I wouldn't run into that issue quite yet. The next place I could reasonably gain levels was at the Seaside Cliffs. I remembered from my first casual playthrough that there are these giant mountainous enemies. Despite having over 8000 HP, they are relatively slow and have very little damage over time resistance. So if I can just stack some dots on them and then put them to sleep, this could just work. And well, work it did like a charm. Here's the setup. I equipped the Fish Skewer for the bleed, the Plague Mask for the poison, and equipped the passives for counter, so I would apply all my dots as soon as I get hit and counterattack. Stalwarts I would survive getting hit once with 1 HP, Pocket Sand, where if I would get knocked into critical HP, I retaliate by blinding the enemy as well, making her miss her next physical attack, and Eagle Eye, so I would be guaranteed to hit my first physical attack of the battle. I also used the sub-command Trickery from the Rogue to use Sleep Bombs. Oh yeah, I haven't mentioned this yet, because it wasn't relevant until now. On top of all that potential for mixing and matching your character jobs, equipments and passives, you can also use the abilities of one other job of your choosing. In this case, the Rogue ability for Sleep Bomb lets me put the Mountainous to sleep despite being a Warlock by default. This will give the damage over time effects more rounds to rack up even more damage before I get knocked out. Well, when fighting a Mountainous, I would get hit by her, survive thanks to Stalwart with 1 HP, counterattack thanks to the counter, and blind her thanks to the Pocket Sand. Since she only uses physical attacks, and is guaranteed to miss thanks to being blinded, I skip 1 turn, then use Sleep Bomb on her to disable her moves for the next 2 turns, and this is just about enough damage to kill her, giving me a decent amount of experience and LP. Now, I've kind of been telling this story as if I had a plan at the time I was doing this challenge run. I didn't, and truth be told, I was hard stuck at this point still. I couldn't reasonably see a way to defeat the Gang Squad. Even if I maxed out my potential level from all the enemies, I could possibly fight for experience. And the only other way to progress would be somehow getting past one of the ninjas up on the mountain, and that seemed fairly impossible as well. because while I could survive one hit thanks to Stalwart, ninjas used 2 weapons at the same time, hitting me twice without me getting the opportunity to retaliate with pocket sand in between, so they just kill me straight through Stalwart, which, well, that's kind of an issue. It seemed kind of hopeless, honestly. I was just mostly wandering around the world trying to see if I missed any useful equipment that could help me in any way. That's also where I found out about the Rundle lag, by the way, giving me a quicker turn timer. So I kept trying out various setups and equipment pieces, hoping it would somehow yield some interesting results. Because I never even got one turn against the ninjas, so I couldn't check their stats. I had no clue what their speed would be, and how much faster my character would have to be to possibly be able to get a turn before them. While trying various setups and just testing things again and again, going back between leveling up some more and going back again, and at some point something peculiar happened. I had my main job class be a rogue because that is the speediest character I had, hoping that I would be able to outspeed them and get a turn in so I could just check their stats at the very least. But instead what happened is the ninja on the left missed just one of his attacks. I didn't even realize it was possible for him to miss. He hadn't even missed once in probably like 50 or 60 attempts of various testing setups. Unfortunately, because he also applied a damage over time effect, instead of me getting my turn to check his stats, I still died to the damage over time effect. But this may be the little light at the end of the tunnel that I was looking for. So I equipped the highest evasion equipment and went for a setup that I felt like had a good chance to defeat him if I get one turn in. These ninjas have effectively no damage over time resistance, so if I could just apply the dots and put them to sleep, I would probably win. I could counteract his damage over time effect by equipping the Warlock passive Regenerator. Heal over time and damage over time effectively nullify each other in this game. However, after probably another 50 attempts later, I could not get the ninja to miss again. I was even desperate enough to ask in the Crystal Project Discord, and the developer responded with, the ninja should have around a 10% chance to miss. But to me, this either wasn't 10% due to it being hard mode and chaos mode at the same time, or I got absurdly unlucky. And again, it wasn't just going at it again and again for these 50 attempts, because that would be relatively quick. It was me wandering around the world looking for other possibilities, and the uncertainty if this was possible at all that made me lose hope. So that's where I gave up. At least for a while. About 7 months. At some point I felt like playing Crystal Project again, so I started streaming a level 1 character challenge run. And when I first saved during that challenge, I noticed my solo character Chaos Mode file. And, well, I knew it was possible for the ninja to miss. Maybe because the Warlock base class I was using had less evasion, I needed to gain a few more levels to increase the chance to dodge. So I went back to the Mountainnesses and grinded until their flame turned green, around level 19, and then I trekked back up the mountain, ready to throw about 100 attempts at the ninja wall again. But then only about 5 minutes later it happened. the ninja missed one of his attacks, which gave me the opening I needed. I put him to sleep because he's so much faster than me that he would get 2 turns in a row, and even though he's blinded for 1, the second one would still kill me. Then, while during those turns, while he was asleep, he took a ton of dot damage and woke up. Then I threw a blaze at him for good measure, adding a 3rd dot to the mix with the fire, and it was enough. I could finally continue. I was stunned at that moment. This opened up so many potential avenues. I could get a 7th crystal to get the Quintar pass, and I would get the ninja chop, which in itself has an insanely good passive for a solo character. I climbed the mansion, carefully avoided triggering the boss, and reached the crystal. And from here, well, the world opened up just a little bit. It's not much yet, but with the new tools we have now, maybe it could just be possible to continue. Oh hi, Editing Yagamoth here. Since it took such a long time for me to, well, finally get out quote-unquote part 2 of this challenge run, I figured I might as well just combine this with the previous part, and actually, instead of just making this multi-part, the entire challenge is in this one video. So if you enjoyed it so far, it would be nice if you could let me know. But also, I want to post 2 things. 1. With the power of hindsight, I can confirm that the ninjas do in fact have about a 10% chance to miss. I definitely did get unlucky. I would guess it only felt like 50 to 60 attempts at a time because, you know, humans are not good at guessing probability and such. But effectively, the reason why I mentioned this is kind of funny, because when I went back to try and record footage of the ninjas knocking me out multiple times consecutively, it was kind of difficult to find like consecutive knockouts because they kept missing. Anyways, the other part is, since this is the continuation and nobody has seen this from this part onwards, let us continue in Chapter 6. Welcome. Or welcome back if you have seen the previous part. Last time we managed to explore a decent part of the world, acquired some useful jobs, barely managed to defeat the weakest enemy in the game to gain some initial levels and build up our stats and unlock abilities, and then eventually, after a lot of struggling, managed to get past the ninjas, which gave us access to the 7th job crystal, Ninja. So, from up here, we can jump on top of the crystal and walk across the mountain. This opens up the right-hand side of the Quintar fields, east of the capital Sequoia, and lets us get past the quartet of bullies that prevented us from going there previously. Although this route isn't all that necessary anymore, since we now have a 7th job crystal. This allows us to get a Quintar rental pass from this guy and circumvent them with our newfound ability to jump a 4-tile gap across the trees. But before that, while I was stuck on the ninjas, I theorized a method of how to get into a different area that you would not normally have access to yet, if I got a hold of a Quintar pass. So let's visit that idea real quick. The Boreor Volcano is a mid-game dungeon that you normally get to after acquiring the ability to jump 3 tiles high. However, people have figured out a rather ridiculous jump you can make to get in there early. When warping over to the Mercury Shrine, you can do a little jump just to the west of it and then head south from here. After a short walk, you reach this section. And from here, you do require at least a Quintar to be able to make the jump. Jump straight south and at the last moment tap left just enough to be able to land on this lamp. It's a very tricky jump and easy to fail. So this jump was known about. However, what I figured out is that we can get there even before being able to summon our own Quintar mount, by using a rental Quintar instead. For reference, you cannot warp while riding the rental dinosaur, so once you rent it, you're limited to wherever you can walk from there. And, well, nothing actually stops us from going all the way from the capital city, jump down onto the Proving Meadows, climb our way
out west to the land, jump across a broken bridge, hop up on the side of this tree onto the elevated terrain across some logs, and then jump south onto a hidden ledge. From here we can get over to the Mercury Shrine, but also south to that awkward jump. Hopefully you don't fail, because you can't just warp back to the Mercury Shrine and try again. And well, it took me a few tries. But once I got it, from here it is actually pretty easy to get to the entrance of the Borior volcano. Even if you dismiss your dinosaur friend, you can just platform your way through. Just avoid the enemies, because they are of course, like all Chaos enemies, pretty nasty. Thankfully, with the few levels I had at this point, running away with the Thief subclass was in fact an option, even if it's not terribly reliable. Editor's note, I should have in fact checked whether I had the ability to run away on this save file before I got into a battle in order to record this footage. Whoops. And back to the Quintar rental I go. A few careful jumps later, and we arrive at the entrance to this dungeon. And this is indeed a classical dungeon in every sense. We have small keys to unlock doors, treasure to find enemies to avoid, and a boss key for the boss door. It's basically like classic Zelda. Running around in here also feels quite unusual. Normally the game has the camera centered on the player, but for this area specifically it goes in a room-by-room fashion instead, which does make the platforming really strange to play if you're used to the, normal perspective. There's some spikes in here, but falling into them just resets you back to where you last stood on solid ground. Unlike some other RPGs with overworld hazards, Crystal Project never actually damages you for falling into them, so you get as many tries as you need in order to cross them. The main gimmick of this volcano is that if you get into combat, you permanently receive a burning debuff in combat. The little white dot text indicate how many more rounds or uses a particular buff has. The flame symbol has no text below it, which means it has no natural expiration time. But since I'm not here to fight anything, this is not much of a concern yet. In terms of equipment and loot, the Volcano dungeon doesn't yield anything particularly noteworthy. The most interesting pieces are a light armor and a hat that give us the armor up buff for a few turns at the start of the battle. But since we don't really have high enough HP to survive yet, or a reliable way to heal up even if we did survive, this isn't quite useful right now. But it does have good defenses compared to our current armor. The other more interesting pieces of equipment would require me to defeat the mini-boss in the corner of the dungeon, as well as the main boss up top. But of course, we still need to power up first to stand any chance. Some of the doors in this dungeon lock up until the enemies are defeated in the room. Of course, we can also simply convince them to take a nice and warm bath instead, and proceed without fighting them. Including the boss, by the way.
It is quite finicky, but eventually we get it.
Once we climb the stairs and reach the top of the volcano, we find our 8th job crystal. This is the Valkyrie, a physical attacker and tanking class with a group healing, buffing and revival capabilities, using spears and heavy armor, but since it is more of a support character that targets other party members, or the entire group for that matter, it likely won't see much use in this challenge. Although the Valkyrie does get access to the stance ability that gives it immunity to poison, bleed, burn and fatigue, as well as day status effects. That could have some potential use, we'll see. And that's most of the volcano. I didn't really gain anything immediately useful, but it's nice to be able to sell some items to have a bit more money to work with.
Oh, editing Yagamoth here, I actually underestimated the importance of the higher defensive stats from the shelter dress compared to my previous armor. But that's a topic for this next section. Back to progression. Chapter 7 of A Chemist and a Fancy Quintar. Thanks to our temporary dinosaur body, we can access the area north of the rolling Quintar fields, after jumping across some trees. This leads to a cave entrance into the Quintar Sanctum. This is one of my favorite entrances into an area. Drop down into the underground. And instead of being met with darkness and rock, it's full of flowers, water and mushrooms. These funky fungi are pretty fun to interact with because they are effectively trampolines. No idea what type of mushroom this is, but I'm happy it's here. Now, this is a pretty short cave, all things considered, but it contains two of the most important points for our progression once we bounce our way up to the upper region. First of all, we find our next job crystal, the Chemist class. Now, if you have played Final Fantasy V, you know that the Chemist job in that game is one of the most insanely powerful classes, if you know how to use it. This one in Crystal Project it does not quite reach those heights, but it's still crazy good, especially for a solo character challenge. The Chemist is a support class that can use items in combat. Remember, there is normally no item command in Crystal Project in battle, so this is quite a unique trait. In short, the Chemist can heal for about 200, 500 and even up to 1000 HP at a time, restore 15, 30 and 60 MP at a time, and it's worth noting, restoring MP in combat is actually kind of difficult to come by in this game, so these recovery abilities are already quite strong. Then the Chemist can also revive, which, well, we're playing a solo character challenge. Do you think this is going to be useful? The answer to this question may be surprising. Although, I guess, thinking about it, if I phrase it that way, you probably won't be surprising anymore. Oh well, let's not worry about that for now. It's not gonna be relevant anytime soon. The Smoke Bomb ability allows us to run away from combat. The Fig Mixture can apply a random buff from a list. And the Sap Mixture applies random debuffs from a list of possibilities. The randomness isn't, well, great. I like it when my strategies are consistent, but they are an option to gain access to powerful boosts in desperate times. Now, those are the active abilities of the Chemist. But something I haven't really mentioned yet, because, well, until now it wasn't really all that relevant. On top of everything else, each job has its own innate ability that only comes into play for the currently selected job class. For example, if our main job is Chemist, our innate ability is called Efficiency, which all abilities have a maximum cooldown of 1. And this is a large reason as to why the Chemist is so powerful. There are a variety of attacks, spells and abilities that are incredibly strong and are mainly balanced around having a longer cooldown until they can be used again. However, a Chemist can use these abilities basically every other turn. But before I introduce you to our bread and butter combo for this challenge run, we need to go on a slight tangent. This is the next boss we need to defeat on top of these mushrooms, the Fancy Quintar. It guards our ability to summon our very own personal friendly dinosaur to explore the world with. It has a humongous 38,000 HP and moves about twice as fast as we do by default. And that is before it casts a permanent haste buff on itself, which will make it go even faster. I think it goes without saying that almost any attack it lands on us will one-shot our character. So, let's briefly go on another tangent in this tangent. I promise I'm going somewhere with this. I also forgot to introduce you to the Ninja class properly. In this game, the Ninja is actually a tank class, but instead of sporting a shield and a ton of defense, we get to dual wield 2 weapons, and our main form of survival is evading enemy attacks. Now, we're neither high enough level nor have enough equipment to make a standard evasion tank work here. But what we also get from Ninja is this handy passive ability, Smokescreen. It reads, dodge the first physical attack received each battle. And since it's a passive ability, we can slap this on any job class we want, like our newly acquired chemist here. Now, you might be wondering, how is this even remotely useful? You get to dodge one attack, sure, but you're not going to defeat this giant lizard before receiving a second physical hit, and yeah, that's true. This is where we finally circle back to the promised bread and butter combo of this challenge, introducing the Chemist plus Entrench combo. If we take the Aegis as our subclass, we gain access to its moves. Entrench is an Aegis ability that boosts any buff our character currently has by 2 extra turns, or 2 extra uses. And since we have the ninja passive for Smokescreen, we can gain additionally 2 physical attacks dodged, up to 3. And thanks to our main class being Chemist, reducing the cooldown to a maximum of 1, we can use Entrench every other turn instead of every 5 turns. So we can just pass a turn, use Entrench again, pass a turn, Entrench again, and infinite dodging. Well, that's if we were fast enough to keep up with the fancy Quintar, that is. Also, of course, Smokescreens don't actually protect us from any spells this thing throws at us either, so we need something more. There is technically one other avenue for progression we could try to go down. If we jump down the West of Boreor volcano, we can enter the desert dungeon through its exit and attempt to defeat the Possessor boss. This guy guards our ability to jump 3 tiles high, and well, let me cut to the chase. Good god, this thing is a pain. It is insanely difficult to defeat with a solo character, and we'll tackle that monstrosity way later. Alright, so we have a way to at least survive the physical attacks the fancy Quintar throws at us. But we're too slow, and we need a way to survive the spells. It is time to power up and grind for a while. The main rule for us currently is that we can potentially defeat strong enemies, but only if they exclusively use physical attacks, and we can keep up with their turn order to keep up the Smokescreen stacks. So this means a single powerful enemy is way more reasonable to defeat than multiple small ones. So, to improve our speed first, in the Sarasara Bazaar we can buy a very expensive accessory, the dancing shoes. I had to basically sell a ton of things to be able to afford those, and they are however very worth it. These shoes provide us with the haste buff at the start of combat for 2 turns, speeding us up by about 25%. 2 turns is not particularly much for how slow we kill enemies, but thanks to Entrench also extending this buff's duration, it is effectively permanent if we use Entrench every other turn. But now to find enemies for us to grind on for some levels. I had 3 locations in mind. First, I attempted the Jailbreakers down in the capital jail. However, their crazed buff speeds their turns up by 50% and makes them way too fast and unreliable to defeat. It was possible, but not much experience gained for a lot of effort. Then I tried the zombies in the same jail. Turns out they take 200% less damage from damage over time effects. Considering these zombies start combat already having the poison debuff, I think they are supposed to get healed by this effect, although, well, they don't, they just take 0 damage from dots. But since my main method of offense is inflicting damage over time effects, this was not really much of an option here. They do take damage from healing, so I could have thrown some potion at them, but I literally didn't think about that until, well, right now when I was writing the script. I wonder if that's gonna become a theme. The next enemy I had in mind was over in the Shodu province. If we hop up on the side of these buildings, avoid the ambush of some rogue enemies, then we arrive at the Shanty Inn. From here it's just a brisk walk, jumping down into the underbelly of the city. Right at the entrance we encounter these bats called Koomuri. Now, these bats are naturally really fast. It was a struggle to keep up, but just about possible. Without going into too much detail, these bats are faster than my character by a good amount, and exclusively attack with physical attacks every turn. For roughly every 7 turns I get, this bat will attack me 8 times, which is of course a problem. because I can effectively only generate one additional smokescreen dodge per turn. So if this thing attacks me twice in a row, I will no longer have any protection against its attacks, and we would get killed. So, in order for me to keep up the smokescreen buff and never get hit, I had to get at least the same amount of turns as the bat. Thankfully, the chemist has this interesting quirk to their main restorative abilities. The tonic that heals for 200 HP and the tincture that restores 15 MP both make my turns come around about twice as quick. The potion healing for 500 HP and ether restoring 30 MP both make my next turn come around about 25% faster. Effectively, even though I don't need the healing, using these items every other turn to speed up my turn timer allows me to extend my buffs before the bat can remove them. And over the course of a few rounds, I gain extra smokescreen stacks on top of that. It's a somewhat slow process, but once I build up enough dodge stacks, I can attack once and apply my damage over time effects. And eventually, after a full 2.5 minutes that is, I defeated the first bat and get a massive amount of level and job experience out of it, as well as enough money to restock the items I just spent on defeating this battle. After every bat defeated, I had to teleport back to this main city and buy more tonics and tinctures, otherwise I would run the risk of running out. Also, of course, because this is apparently now a running theme, there were actually some better encounters for me to grind levels on in the Boreor Volcano that I didn't even think about at the time. Oh well, it's too late now. After roughly 2.5 hours of grinding, I reached level 30 and figured this may be enough to fight the fancy Quintar. However, upon setting up and doing my first attempt, I realized this is still not enough speed. Not by a long shot. To really quickly explain this bar at the bottom here, because, well, I haven't done so yet, this is the timeline. Basically, you can see the fancy Quintar is gonna get 2 turns, then I get 1, then the fancy Quintar gets 1, then I get 1, and then the fancy Quintar gets another 2. Kind of meaning that the fancy Quintar is significantly faster than me. Still more than twice as fast. We may have powered up in vain here. Well, maybe. We cannot keep up, and leveling up any further was going to be both tedious and yield only minor benefits. So it is time to unpack the gambling side of our toolkit. Remember this one? Yeah. This is not the type of strategy I like to resort to, but it felt unavoidable at the time. Alright. The setup I went into battle with goes as follows. Our main class is Chemist with the subcommand from the Aegis class. We activate the passives for Eagle Eye, so our physical attacks guaranteed hit. This normally applies to only a single attack, but thanks to Entrench we get as many guaranteed hits as we want. Smokescreen, so we can dodge incoming physical attacks of course. And equip Shield, so we can actually equip the Boomer Shield because the Chemist class cannot equip a shield by default. This very interestingly named Boomer Shield reduces wind damage by 30%. Alongside that we equip the Storm Hood, which reduces wind damage by another 50%. Plus the accessory Shell Amulet will additionally reduce all incoming magic damage by another 35%. Which, this would normally be a temporary buff, but thanks to using Entrench every other turn, kind of like the haste buff that we get, is gonna be more or less permanent for our encounter. These 3 things combined will reduce damage from the Whirlwind spell by a huge amount, enough so that we can survive 2 of these spells without having to heal in between. Well, we survive if neither of the Whirlwind spells crit, that is. For reference, the exclamation mark after the damage number indicates that this was in fact a critical hit right here. For offense, we simply equip the Fish Skewer. This will inflict the bleed debuff for 6 turns and deal roughly 700 damage per tick. This is not fast, but a whole lot more damage output than we could otherwise achieve. And we also only need to attack once every 6 turns, and can focus on survival otherwise. The Shelter Dress was the highest magic resistance armor I had, so despite me not thinking much of it initially, it actually still came in handy for this. And last but certainly not least, the Dancing Shoes give us the haste buff so we can get our next turn faster. So here's the plan. In order to keep our bus from falling off, we have to use Entrench every other turn. Further, our Smokescreen buff is vital to our survival. We do not survive the barrage of physical attacks without it in our current setup. This also means that if the Fancy Quintar physically attacks us at the beginning of combat before we can use Entrench, it's a reset. So it either has to cast Whirlwind, Quick, or Haste as its first move for us to be able to use Entrench before it attacks. Next, we hope that we didn't take too much damage yet and can get the big gamble that decides whether this attempt has any chance to win. The Fig Mixture. The chemist has the ability to apply a random buff from a list of possibilities, and we need one particular one to survive. With a roughly 3% chance, we can get the Crazed buff. Remember those crazy fast jailers earlier? This will effectively be doubling our turn speed, and funnily enough, this brings our turn timer almost exactly on par with the Fancy Quintar. We literally need a 3% chance buff to be able to even the playing field. Alrighty, let's speed through the attempts and see how many tries it took me to get that. Nope, this one attacked us before we could use Entrench. Nope, I need my smoke screens. No. I hadn't yet figured out my wind resist equipment and took too much damage from Whirlwind, so I got that figured out in the next one. Nope, smokescreen gun. And again, and again. This was a good start with a Whirlwind miss, and, well, I didn't get the Crazed buff, so next attempt. 3 Fazil attacks in a row means I don't have enough time to try the random buff mix, so this is a reset as well. Oh, and because the chemist uses items for its abilities, I occasionally have to either reload a save or go buy more supplies in town. You get the idea, this requires a lot of luck to get going. Let's speed through these things. Nope, no, no, nope, nope, no, 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 nope, no, 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 oh, oh yes, there we go, here we are. So in this case, it took roughly half an hour to get one attempt going, and we are not out of the woods yet. If the Fancy Quintar decides to use Whirlwind twice in a row and gets a critical hit in either of those without us being able to heal in between, we still have a high likelihood of getting wiped out. In fact, after I used the Fig Mixture to get my first Crazed buff, I immediately had to heal up, otherwise it would get wiped out by the third Whirlwind spell. This meant I couldn't use Entrench to extend my buff durations perfectly. Luckily, I do have one turn to spare, where I will still keep my temporary buffs before they fall off. But this now means I no longer had any leeway at all for the rest of the fight, and I have to extend my buffs via Entrench every other turn, no matter what. But at least for now, I seem to have stabilized, and I even got to apply the bleed debuff to start damaging the Fancy Quintar. After a few more rounds, I was hit by a Whirlwind critical and wanted to heal back up to full for safety via potion. But I ran out of potions here, which means I could only heal via tonics, which would not recover all the HP lost. Or use Z potions, which is basically a full heal but does not have the improved turn time, so I wouldn't gain any extra speed. Additionally, I could only heal via tonics 7 more times and the Z potions 5 more times. So this was going to get tight on resources. One thing I haven't mentioned yet is that the Entrench ability also costs 10 MP each time I use it, so I occasionally had to use tinctures or ethers in between in order to keep up my magic points, which of course are also in limited supply. A few rounds later, the Fancy Quintar decides to cast Quick. This gave it 2 turns in a row instantly, and since I wasn't quite full on health at that point, if it used 2 Whirlwinds in a row, I would be dead. Thankfully, the second attack is just a regular strike. A similar situation happened shortly after. The Fancy Quintar used a Whirlwind just as I had to use Entrench to keep up my buffs, and gets a critical hit, which means if it used Whirlwind twice in a row here, I would be dead. Thankfully, I got lucky. Actually, thinking about it, I'm not even sure the Fancy Quintar can use Whirlwind twice in a row. Well, and going over my video footage, I'm pretty sure I've never seen it use Whirlwind twice in a row either, so I might have been worried over nothing. Except for the turn where it used Quick into Whirlwind, I don't think I actually was in any danger. Well, maybe. Anyways, like this turn here, where it casted Whirlwind and then immediately casted Quick to potentially unleash another Whirlwind right after. This was dangerous. Thankfully I didn't have to use Entrench that round, otherwise it could have gotten dicey as well. Also, just to reiterate, the Whirlwind does have a chance to miss. It also has a chance to crit, which is a bit unusual for spells, and it is the same chance to miss as it is to crit, and I've counted 3 critical hits so far and 0 misses. I may not have been able to survive this for much longer, but thankfully I didn't have to. In any RPG that allows, I have a particular kind of strategy I love to employ for some reason, running my enemies out of resources, so they become mostly harmless. And I had finally reached that point here. The Fancy Quintar had 27 MP remaining, and because Whirlwind costs 33 MP to cast, I was now safe. No more Whirlwinds, only physical attacks from here on out, so as long as I didn't run out of smokescreen stacks, I would win. While the Fancy Quintar and I have the same turn speed, thanks to having used tonics, tinctures and potions as well as ether throughout the fight, I got to speed up my turn timer by quite a bit. So, at this stage, this resulted in me accumulating quite a lot of smokescreen stacks to dodge physical damage. And so, shortly after, and by shortly I mean about 3 minutes later, because this thing still had a ton of HP, I eventually came out victorious. This was a major struggle. The leveling up originally was intended for me to gain extra speed so I would be able to keep up the Fancy Quintar more reliably, but it turned to be quite important for me to actually survive the Whirlwind spells with the extra HP I gained instead. And from here, the world opens up. Well, almost. Chapter 10. 3 steps to unlock everything. Step 1. After defeating the Fancy Quintar, we obtain the Fancy Quintar's Eye. We can bring this eyeball to the local Quintar enthusiast just outside the cavern, a little ways south. This guy is absolutely enamored with Quintars, and if you talk to the little dinosaur friends around his house, they say that they are treated very well. Which in my opinion makes his obsession with Quintar eyeballs a bit, strange. Regardless, once we show him the Fancy Quintar Eye, he is enthralled by it, and rewards us with a Quintar flute in exchange. This flute will now allow us to call our very own Quintar to ride on anywhere, anytime. Now, specifically, the Quintar flute allows us to access 2 places we couldn't reach before. For one, in the desert. We can now jump across this gap, which allows us to collect the last Watchtower token and trade them in to this guy in the nearby Zarazaro Bazaar, and gain a key to enter the pyramid. This would be the standard route for progression. Right inside the pyramid we can acquire our next job crystal, the Dervish. Aside from the cool name, this is a spellcaster that can equip medium and light armor, and largely focuses on dealing damage with offensive earth and magic spells. The Dervish's special trick is the ability to recover MP while generating AP during combat, so it can recover MP in quite a unique way. Unfortunately, I haven't really found any use for this job in a solo character challenge so far. Also, very briefly, AP is a resource you gain in battle, and is mostly used for physical attackers. You start with 0 at the beginning of every combat, and accumulate it at the start of every turn, by using the attack command and getting hit with physical attacks. Now, we could run through the pyramid, gather a few random treasures, and eventually attempt to beat the boss at the end. Defeating this boss would result in us getting the Ibeck Bell, which summons this fluffy friend which would allow us to jump 3 tiles high and access a lot more of the world. There's just one problem. The boss we would need to defeat for it. This scraggly Halloween tree named Possessor is a huge roadblock to defeat for a solo character. He summons these petrified masks, and when the mask gets just 1 turn, they will cast Possess on you, effectively making the character they target unable to do anything whatsoever. You're supposed to either remove that debuff or kill the mask in order to free the character. But that's kind of difficult to do when you have just only 1 character. I knew this guy would be a giant problem since I already struggled tremendously against him in my regular solo character challenge without Chaos mode. In that run, I eventually figured out how to nuke him with a very specific setup. However, in Chaos mode, this guy has about twice the amount of HP, so this brute force approach would almost certainly not be an option. especially not yet, when we were still lacking a lot of levels and tools. So I didn't even attempt to defeat this guy at the time. Thankfully, there is one other avenue for us to progress through. So, step 2 to open up the world is to run up a waterfall and catch some salmon. We're going fishing. To the west of the capital city, we can reach a little cave section. Our Quintar buddy allows us to finally hop across this gap, and we arrive in the Salmon River, where a bunch of enemies are running back and forth on the logs. This requires some tricky platforming to avoid all of them, but with a little bit of practice, eventually I bump into another enemy. Oh well. Actually, to my surprise, I didn't immediately die, and more importantly, thanks to being a chemist, I could actually use the smoke bomb ability to run away from this encounter most of the time. I completely forgot I was technically over-leveled for this area at level 30, and the chance to run away successfully is largely dictated by the level difference from your character to the enemy. So I still couldn't reasonably beat these regular enemies, but at least I could traverse this area relatively unscathed. At the end of the river log journey, we arrive at the Salmon Sprint Cottage, that is run by bears. Here we can sign up for the salmon race that can yield some nice rewards. You know, until writing this script, I never really thought about the part where it's salmon and bears that are cooperating to make this kind of race work. Huh. Oh well, about the race. If I somehow manage to reach first place, we could acquire a salmon cello. This instrument would allow our character to summon our very own fishy to ride on, and traverse through the water at any point anywhere we want. But there's one catch. We have to rent a salmon in order to participate in this race. And this temporary fish friend is unfortunately not particularly fast compared to the competition. In short, you're not intended to win with the rental fish. From what I was told, the fastest opponent, the white salmon, doesn't even race the normal way, but instead just spawns in just a bit ahead of you towards the end of the track. And because it is flat out a lot faster than the rental fish, you normally have no chance. Now, you may expect me to tell you that, but there is a way to win anyways. But I've actually never done that before. I've heard it is indeed possible, but at the time I was doing this challenge, I had never even seen anyone doing it. A quick interjection here. When creating the script for this video, I found this footage by Snowlily on YouTube, where they do in fact win the race with the rental salmon. It seems that the white salmon got somehow body blocked by this red fish, which allowed Snowlily to stay ahead and win. That's pretty neat. Anyways, but I did not win this. In fact, I kind of accidentally waited in front of the finish line because I didn't realize it didn't cross it yet and came in almost last. Still got a Poseidon shard though. What we can do instead is participate in the race and then just completely ignore the track and just go out into the big wide world. Of course, once the race timer runs out, we get teleported back to the Salmon Cottage. But we do have just about enough time to perform another sequence break. If we swim all the way over here, avoiding all the massively powerful sea sharks and other enemies along the way, we can find a tiny, insignificant looking hole on the seafloor here. And once we dive down here, we find a cave with a very special chest that contains the salmon violin. With this, we can now summon our own salmon friend without having to worry about the race timer. Now, if you're confused about the roundabout way of how we acquired the means to be able to swim, partially this is by design, and partially this is because I'm kind of sequencing this stuff backwards here. Let me give you a very brief overview of how the standard way to progress through the game to unlock the world actually works. After defeating the fancy Quintar and getting your own Quintar flute, you're supposed to go into the desert and acquire the last watchtower token to enter the pyramid. From here you can clear out this dungeon and acquire the ability to jump 3 tiles high by defeating the boss and obtaining the Ibex Bell. With the Ibex Bell you can then subsequently jump all over the place, eventually climb up into the snowy area and even higher up to the tall mountain. At the peak of this mountain you will eventually find a friendly owl perched up there. That leaves you with a gift. the Owl Drum. This marvelous instrument enables you to summon your very own owl companion that allows you to now glide through the air. You cannot fly up, just fall slowly, which nonetheless gets you to places that you couldn't reach before. Specifically, up top of the Quinta Shrine, you can find this other owl just floating into the distance when you try to interact with it. So if you follow its lead, after quite a long time of just floating in one direction, you land on the island in the middle of the ocean, the Jidam Batangal. From here, you can find 3 keys on the island to enter the large temple in the center, traverse it, and eventually land down here, where we found the summoned violin. With this, you would now have unlocked almost every location accessible in the entire world, including the depths of the ocean. And that's how you normally unlock the world. Now, back to our solo character challenge. While we did just skip the Ibex Bell and cannot jump 3 tiles high, surprisingly this does not impede our exploration of the world much. Being able to swim more or less allows us to access the entire world, because, and this is one of my absolute favorite things about this game, if you see a body of water anywhere in the world, in 95% of the cases, it is somehow connected to all the water in the rest of the world. You just need to know how and where to reach those places. The bigger roadblock is actually not having a friendly owl to glide around with. However, I did have a plan for that. If we cannot get our own floaty friend from the top of the mountain, we are going to make our own. And this leads us to our 3rd step to open up the world. Chapter 12. Making Quinta Friends. To make travel the world a little faster, we are first going to go back to the salmon race. Conveniently, on our first visit to the salmon cottage, we get this Poseidon shard. It allows us to teleport to the Poseidon shrine, literally right above the race house. This also means we can buy a Poseidon stone from this shrine, which gives us another location we can quick travel to whenever we want. And now with the salmon violin, the race is very winnable, and our first place prize is the salmon cello. The only difference between the 2 fish mounts is that the cello is just faster, and considering I'll be traversing the world a lot, this is a nice quality of life upgrade. With our newfound freedom, we head over to the Shodu province and swim up this waterfall back here. At the top we find the Quinta Reserve, where the little dinosaur friends have their peaceful village, and a mausoleum. So of course, we immediately enter the mausoleum and go grave robbing like any normal adventurer would. This dungeon is a series of challenges where we simply need to press the buttons in a certain sequence before the timer expires. The first one is quite simple and just introduces us to this concept. The second one is a bit trickier and requires us to avoid some enemies along the way. So, editing Yagamoth here, I tried for about 25 minutes to get a clean run of the second room, avoiding all the enemies in the process, but I just couldn't do it. This guy kept always catching me, and at the level we currently have, we only have a 20% chance to run away. Well, I guess it worked out this time, but there's about 10-20 failed attempts before this. And I have no idea if I originally managed to entirely avoid these guys, or whether I also just relied on the small chance of running away. Anyways, moving on. And the third one is even more tricky. We have to navigate these ledges and waterways in a particular order. Also a quick interjection here. Remember when I mentioned that most of the water in this game is connected to all other water sources? Yeah, this is the case here as well. I could have just skipped the first 2 puzzles by simply entering this area from the Quinta Sanctum, where we defeated the fancy Quinta earlier. But I forgot. Oh well. Anyways, the last sequence of switches requires us to start all the way in the northwest corner. Then, go straight south to hit this switch, hit the next switch just east and try not to fumble the landing because you have to be quite quick. Continue east, pass some obstacles and barely make it to the next switch. Then run up north and squeeze onto this ledge button over here, and then book it to the central switch to open the door. I could have used the Quinta for easier travel on the ledges, since the fish's momentum is quite tricky to control. But see these little holes all over the place? If you get too close to them, boom, enemy encounter. Which of course is bad for our health. We still cannot really fight most things here. At the bottom of the Quintar Mausoleum, we find an important key item, the Bubble Quintar. This handy bird skull item, it allows us to understand and talk to the Quintars around here. Back outside in the home of the Quintars, here we are. Welcome to the Dayon Shrine. Like all shrines in this game, we can purchase a stone to be able to warp here anytime we wish. Although here we run into our next obstacle, money. So far we've managed to just about scrape by with the amount of money we've collected. I could still sell some things for now, but we'll want to figure out a more permanent solution. Conveniently, there is a decent way to make money right here. If we participate in the Quintar races, we can earn a decent amount of money reasonably quickly. But the Quintar from the flute will not work here. We do have to hatch our own Quintar first. So, how do we get Quintar eggs? Simple, by defeating various Quintars around the world. There is one right outside here, just to the east of the Dayon Shrine entrance. Down this hole, this is the Woke Quintar. Specifically Woke Red Quintar. If we defeat it by, well, preparing a little, I suppose. This guy is actually not quite as strong as the Fancy Quintar, but still a fair bit stronger than, well, my character. I could have employed the same strategy as before and just attempt to use the Fig Mixture to randomly get the Craze buff to keep up with this guy as well. But I had a different solution here. In general, I do prefer my strategies to be more reliable than a 3% chance, even if this one is a bit out there. To be honest, I'm actually quite proud of coming up with this strategy. So, how do I even begin explaining this? Alright, the Stalwart buff. In order for the Stalwart buff to work, we need to be at full HP. Then, no matter how much damage we take, it will leave us at 1 HP remaining. Now, riddle me this. What would happen if our maximum HP was 1? Well, as long as we are not dead, we would be at our maximum HP of 1. And if we get hit by any attack, we will be left at 1 HP still. Now that is all fun and dandy, but we are not at 1 HP right now. But we can get there. Earlier in the Salmon River, we can find this chest here. This is the Bloodbind Sword. It gives our attacks a 50% lifesteal, so we heal for half the damage we deal. But more importantly, it reduces our maximum HP by 300, down to 145. So in order to get even lower HP, we have to be at a lower level. Thankfully, we don't have to redo this entire challenge run until this point at lower level. In the capital Sequoia, there is this growth change service. In short, depending on what job your character is when you level up, you gain different bonuses to your stats. If you're a warrior, then gaining a level, you mainly gain HP, strength and vitality. If you're a rogue, then leveling up, you mainly gain dexterity and speed. This place allows you to reallocate the levels into other jobs, so you can optimize your stats if you wish to. I had previously redistributed the levels I gained from Warlock into Rogue, because this was the speediest job I had access to when I was still attempting to defeat the ninja, and then later the Fancy Quintar. So I'm just going to remove all my levels and put them into Chemist. Chemist has a very low HP maximum per level and almost as much speed as the Rogue. But of course, we can't just stay at level 30, we have to reduce it to 19. Now, while having the Bloodbind Sword equipped, we have a maximum HP of 1. Excellent. Although we do lose a lot of speed for this setup, so it's not all that great. Alrighty, getting back to the Woke Red Quintar, here is our setup. Like before, we are a chemist for the reduced cooldowns with the subcommand for Aegis to extend our buffs via Entrench. We do equip the passives for Equip Sword, so we can use the Bloodbind Sword to reduce our HP. Counter, so every time we get hit with a physical attack we can retaliate. Eagle Eye, so we don't miss our physical attacks. Stalwart to survive with 1 HP, and Smokescreen to dodge 1 physical attack so we have enough time to get started extending our buffs before they get removed. We also equip the Plague Mask to inflict the poison debuff with any physical attack, which will be our main source of damage. The Blue Cape and Caster Ring increase our maximum MP, so we can cast Entrench a few more times before having to restore MP. And importantly, the Dancing Shoes, so we have the haste buff to speed us up during the battle. Let's do this and see if the strategy works. The Quintar starts the battle by beginning to cast a quick spell, so it will be acting 2 turns in a row, and because it also is always faster than us, this will be effectively 3 attacks in a row we have to survive. However, thanks to the quick spell having a casting time, we get to use Entrench before we get hit by the barrage of attacks, giving us 3 Smokescreen stacks and 3 Stalwart stacks. Thanks to our 1 HP Stalwart strategy, even if we get hit by 2 Whirlwinds, we would still be fine. In the next few turns, I keep using the Tincture command, even though I don't need the MP, just so I speed up my next turn coming around more quickly. This allows me to build a bunch of Smokescreen and Stalwart buff stacks before they get depleted. And then, this guy is already out of MP, so no more Whirlwinds will come our way, just physical attack. So I end up hitting it once, getting the poison debuff rolling, and shortly after, its attacks catch up to me and deplete my last Smokescreen stack. So now it will start jumping away at my Stalwart buffs. But this also means, thanks to counter, we will retaliate every single time and refresh the poison debuff. So as long as we don't run out of Stalwart buffs before the Quintar runs out of HP, we win. Honestly, the biggest surprise to me was how smoothly this strategy worked. I expected there to be a problem cropping up, but it just worked. You may be wondering, couldn't you just do this against every boss ever, since you're effectively immortal? And the answer is definitely a no. At level 19, we cannot keep up with the speed of bosses later on. This worked here because this is not even a boss, this is just more or less a regular enemy with a special item drop. After the battle, we find a Quintar egg, and we send it to the nursery in Dion Shrine. From here we can buy an expensive incubator and hatch our new dinosaur friend and give it an appropriate name. Now, once we also purchase an even more expensive Quintar Ocarina, we can call in our buddy at any time to ride around the world. Real quick interjection here. While running around gathering footage for this video, I happened to run around inside the Quintar Sanctum. There's some Quintar running in circles here that you could defeat in order to gain X as well. However, I randomly lured one of them over the edge and into the water and I acquired an egg? I had no idea this was a thing. Maybe that's a bug? I don't know actually. Either way, this egg would have been much easier to acquire. Now, functionally, this dinosaur mount is mostly the same as if we use the Quintar Flute, with 2 key differences. Once we get more Quintars, we will be able to breed them and eventually get Quintars with new and unique abilities. And the other part is, we can now participate in these Quintar races. The first race costs 10 silver to enter and leads us to the northern stretch, where we can take a few shortcuts, pass through some tight gaps, and this is actually quite tricky to do, but farther down we can even jump onto our competitor's head and take another maybe less intended shortcut. And then, instead of dropping down into the regular racetrack, well, we can just go around the entire stuff down there and making it much easier to reach the goal. We spend 10 silver and win 50 silver for placing first. This is a method to make money, if we need any. Up until now, I've just been selling equipment I probably won't use in the future I found along the way. But this is more reliable, and we can make it even better if we manage to get a more powerful Quintar by gathering more eggs. Breed them together to get Quintars with different abilities that can win races much quicker. Here's the flowchart on what we need. Credit to Saito Hikari and Matra for creating this chart. I'm hoping I'm crediting the correct people for this. Anyways, don't worry, you don't need to know this entire thing. The important part about this graph are these guys. We need to defeat various Quintars around the world to get the X4, a Woke River Quintar, a Trusty Blue Quintar, a Trusty Red Quintar, a Woke Red Quintar, which we already have, and a brutish desert Quintar. Once we manage to acquire all of these, we have an avenue to raise a golden Quintar, which will make the owl effectively obsolete. Although getting all the eggs is going to be a bit tricky without the ability to glide or jump 3 tiles high. But I have a plan. Our first target is this river Quintar. Teleporting to the Poseidon Shrine, we can ride our fish up this waterfall and... Hold up, I forgot, there's a job crystal in here. This salmon here asks us a few questions and then floats over the middle of this pit filled with lava, giving us an opportunity to jump on its head and get to the crystal. So I guess salmons can fly in this universe, just not mine I suppose. Either way, this is the Nomad job, a fairly unique spellcaster and healer that uses AP instead of MP as a resource to cast spells. The Nomad will be quite useful later down the road. Back to the Quintars. We can either reach the location by doing an awkward jump to the top of the Catfish Temple that we just entered to get the crystal, and then climb up and jump down the left. Or, much simpler, go through the interior of the Catfish Temple, swim up the waterfall and emerge outside just above the river Quintar. I just would like to say that I enjoy these bouncy mushrooms. Don't know why, but there's something fun about them. This one we can take down exactly like the last one. Survive the onslaught of magic thanks to having a maximum HP of 1, build up a lot of buffs for survival and defeat it through the power of poison. Sorry, you can't see the health bar here. For the video footage I usually go to encounter the enemy or boss, and then go by its bestiary entry in the town of Sequoia to be able to see its health bar and MP, but I think I forgot for this footage. Oh well. We have acquired the Woke River Quintar. The special ability of this one is to be able to float on water without sinking. Next up, let's get a Desert Quintar. Their special ability is to be just flat out faster than any other Quintar, which will make travel across distances a lot nicer. The difficulty is reaching one of their locations. They appear in these places on the edges of the desert. To my knowledge, I cannot reach the ones on the west of the desert without the ability to glide or jump 3 tiles high. However, we can get to the one to the east of the desert, either through going back through climbing the Boreal Volcano and jumping down to the west, or, now that we have our Quintar body anywhere, we do this slight sideways jump from the top of Yamagawa to this ledge, and then we proceed along this route here. Do another little jump, and eventually arrive at this tower. Just to the east of this would be the Boreal Volcano, and to the west a route across the top of the walls to the Desert Quintar. The same strategy applies as before. Build up buffs and defeat it through poison. Desert Quintar acquired. Okay, apparently this was not the same song and dance because the Desert Quintar is way faster than me. What did I do? Alrighty, I figured it out. So, my sequencing is wrong in my telling of the story. I don't know how to fix this. Just pretend that I guess I did this after the leveling portion that comes a bit later, okay? That would be nice. Anyways, we just have full wind resistance equipment and are really fast compared to most enemies anyways. To give you a brief overview over this battle, we are now at level 60, which is normally the maximum level. This gives us a lot more maximum HP as well as speed to work with, and allowed me to easily tank the wind spells and keep up with the Desert Quintar's turn timer without doing anything crazy. We are still using the Chemist plus Aegis job combination to survive and extend our buffs, as well as utilize damage over time effects to deal almost all of the damage. This Desert Quintar is almost as strong as the fancy Quintar earlier. just a bunch less HP. So still, if I wanted to beat it without grinding out levels first, we would have to resort to the same random crazed buff chance. And since this is a very long walk to get back here, it just made more sense to come back here later with a few levels. Our weapon of choice is the torch, which inflicts 3 turns of burn, and we have the Reaper passive to inflict 1 turn of bleed whenever we physically attack. It did not end up posing much of a challenge since it's already out of MP here, so I'll just skip to the end. Oh, no, it was fine. I probably used the other weapon. Anyways, Desert Quintar acquired. A trusty blue and a trusty red remain. They appear here, 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 here and here on the map. On all but one of them we can get to without having the ability to glide or jump 3 blocks high. The trusty red location on the far west I don't think we can access currently. However, this trusty red location we can get to by climbing all the way up the mountain and doing a somewhat precise jump down to the left past the spikes. But climbing up all the way would take a while, so let's go for this one instead. We can take the same waterfall north of the Shodo province that we took to get up to the Quintar Sanctuary and then simply jump down the other side. But real quick before that, there is another shrine location where I can buy another teleport stone right here. This will make it a bit easier for us to access this area with the Ganymede stone in the future. And like before, the song and dance just repeats. Stack up buffs, poison, defeat and acquire a trusty red Quintar egg. One more remains. The trusty blue Quintar locations are on top of Mount Yamagawa, and all the other way over here on top of the Dion Shrine. Normally the one on top of the Quintar area would be locked behind either having both 3-block jump Ibeck, as well as the gliding of the owl, or you could jump down from the area to the west of here, the Chalice of Tar. However, in order to climb the Chalice of Tar, you do need the owl. Well, or do you? Like the salmon race, when participating in the various Quintar races, we are placed in a variety of locations all over the world. Race number 1 is over here in the snowy region. It can give us access to the Tall Heights shop with some powerful equipment if we drop down from the mountain halfway through. Race number 2 brings us to the Eastern Chasm. This doesn't seem immediately useful, but we'll come back to this later. A race number 3 brings us to the Chalice of Tar. Starting on the western side, we can make our way around, run for about 25 seconds, and simply drop down here, right into the claws of the trusty blue Quintar. This battle has the exact same song and we win once more before too long. We now have all the basic requirements to breed the ultimate Quintar, except we need money. A lot of money. The incubators for the eggs cost a lot and we need to feed our Quintars appropriately as well for them to agree to summon new eggs. My initial plan for this was as follows. Selling all sorts of random items to be able to afford breeding up to the Highland Quintar. Without going into too much detail, breeding works like this. You make your Quintar happy by winning races and you keep it well nourished by feeding it cheese until they are happy. With an exclamation mark. Then you select 2 Quintars and suddenly egg. Then we use an incubator on the egg and repeat the process. There's a bit more finicky stuff to it, but I don't actually know how it exactly works, to be honest. I just feed them cheese until they are no longer hungry and go on the racetrack until they feel like conjuring new eggs. Either way, after a short while we get our first Highland Quintar. And here's the plan. We go to win the 4th racetrack, which is somewhere under the water in the ocean, entirely enclosed in a tunnel. And then we unlock the 5th racetrack. This one takes place right outside the Quintar Reservoir, and it's actually a very tricky racetrack across various trees and mushrooms, and if you fall anywhere, you probably just lost the race and have to restart. But the only reason why we have to take such a roundabout path through the area is because Quintars can only jump 1 block high. Yeah, except the Highland Quintar. That one's special ability is to be able to jump 2 blocks high. And since we pay half a gold to participate in the race, and receive 2.5 gold for completing it, we profit 2 gold each time we do this. That's a decent amount of money, fairly fast as well. So after about 10 minutes I got bored. And I had a different idea. More tangents, yay! You see, I was still about level 20 at this point, having gained 1 level from defeating the various Quintars for the eggs. And now that I had access to most of the world, I could potentially try to defeat some higher level monsters with the cheesy chemist and trench strategy. As long as it was only 1 enemy at a time, and they exclusively attacked physically, I could just stack up smoke screens and eventually defeat them. This would give me both levels and a lot of money depending on how strong the enemy is that I could defeat. So I began searching for potential encounters I could take on. My first thought was some underwater enemy called Burden. I remember them being pretty easy to take down in a previous playthrough, as well as dropping 5 gold at a time. So I signed up for it and, well, it turns out these guys have quite some offensive spells in their arsenal, so that's not a good idea. Next up, trying to find other enemies, I noticed these young ones. They exclusively use physical attacks. So as long as I could match its speed, I would be golden. But that was exactly the problem. At this low of a level, I was just strictly too slow. I could barely keep up with using tinctures and tonics to speed up my turn timer and couldn't ever attack in between, otherwise I would lose my smokescreen buffs. So that was a bust as well. So my research continued and I eventually landed on this little fellow, the Sea Salamander. While this guy was not much slower than the young one, the key difference is that it uses water spells. And while these do ignore my smokescreen evasion stacks, we have an armor from much earlier in the game, literally the 3rd area, the seaside cliffs. It has a chest containing the swimsuit. This reduces incoming water damage by 75%, and in conjunction with Gel, I would actually survive the onslaught of spells until it ran out of MP. And at that point, I would have stacked up enough smoke screens to survive the subsequent physical attacks and defeat it by applying all sorts of damage over time effects. I equipped the Torch for 3 turns of burn, the Plague Mask for 3 turns of poison, and the Blood Spiller passive from the Reaper class to apply 1 turn of bleed every time I hit with a physical attack. On top of that, I took a detour to the Shodu province, where I could now reach a shop with a very useful accessory, the First Strike Mitt. This allowed me to get my first turn in combat much earlier than the enemy, and I could begin stacking up my buffs soon, and that's how I got started in leveling. It wasn't a particularly fast process, but I got a lot of money along the way, and eventually reached level 40. According to my save file timestamp, this took around 2.5 hours, but I'm not entirely sure how accurate these numbers really are, considering the entire challenge up until this point had taken me more like 30 to 40 hours. What with all the resetting and researching that is not tracked through here. Anyways, at level 40, we are now much faster, so I attempted to defeat these young ones again. And we were just about fast enough to not only keep up, but occasionally attack to inflict debuffs and defeat them. Each kill gave us a good amount of experience and, importantly, 5 gold. These are some of the highest level enemies in the game, so unlike other encounters, they would never stop giving experience. Alright, the maximum level in Crystal Project is 60, so this took around another 2-ish hours to reach. But now we have vastly increased our stats and gained a ton of gold in the process. You may think this is a bit excessive, to immediately grind out max level, but trust me, even if you play Chaos hard mode normally, it feels like the game just expects you to be at level 60 sooner rather than later. Let's get back to our dinosaur racing facility. With all the money troubles now gone, here's how that went. For all the Quintar breeding, I've basically pursued the same strategy. Alright, editing Yagamoth here. Originally I just had each individual Quintar be listed and telling you which Quintar I breed with which one in order to get the next result, but I feel like that's a bit excessive, so Here we go, Golden Quintar. I got it in the end. Yay! This breeding ordeal took about 2-ish hours and around 130 gold to complete. We had to win quite a lot of races with the various Quintars to make them happy enough to be willing to mate and feed them a ton of cheese. The higher level the Quintars get, the more wins they need to be willing to breed. But in the end, we now have access to the best mobility in the game, that combines all of the previous Quintar's abilities into one. The Golden Quintar can jump 2 tiles high like a Highland Quintar, dive and swim like an Aqua Quintar, float like a Black Quintar, and is even as fast as a Desert Quintar. The only thing it cannot do is jump 3 tiles high. So eventually getting the Ibex Bell would still be helpful to reach a select few places. So, that was a lot. And at this point, I could reach almost any location and acquire almost any remaining equipment as well as jobs that could still be useful. Having reached the maximum level, and with the world at my fingertips thanks to the Golden Quintar, I realized I could probably defeat a lot of bosses now. Maybe even most of them. But there was one battle looming on the horizon that I was pretty much 100% certain would be impossible to complete as a solo character in Chaos mode. A battle that took me hours of tinkering and strategizing to complete in my previous solo character challenge on the more forgiving hard mode without the inflated HP and damage numbers of Chaos. I expected this victory to be truly impossible. But I decided, with a wink and a smile, I would try anyways. It is time to become a lot stronger. We'll gather all sorts of useful equipment and trinkets, and then attempt to not just beat the game, but to conquer every single boss. Starting with the bosses we've skipped so far, and then many more. So, we have a long way to go. One character, getting almost one shot by the weakest boss while we are at max level. So we can only survive through clever strategies. Chapter 13. It's just bosses from here. My favorite part, I like bosses.